We've all heard the phrase, start with the end in mind. In teaching, that sounds obvious, but in practice, it's not always how lessons get planned. This presentation is going to look at how understanding by design and Bloom's taxonomy help fix that. We've all heard the phrase, start with the end in mind. In teaching, that sounds obvious, but in practice, it's not always how lessons get planned. This presentation is going to look at how understanding by design and Bloom's taxonomy help fix that. Let's be honest, sometimes lesson planning starts with, this looks fun, and only later do we think, wait, what was the goal again? UBD exists because we've all been there. When planning starts this way, learning can feel busy, but very disconnected. And that's exactly the problem UBD is designed to solve. This is where understanding by design comes in. Grant Wiggins is very clear about this. UBD is not a teaching style. You can still be a bad teacher with a great plan. UBD just makes it much harder to accidentally teach without purpose. UBD works backward through 3 stages, starting with the end goal, which is your outcome, and working back to instruction. This backward flow is what separates UBD from the traditional planning, where instruction often comes first. What's important here is that UBD is not a linear checklist. It's a way of thinking that keeps that end goal driving every decision. Stage 1 forces us to ask a hard question. What do I want students to still be able to do when I'm no longer standing next to them? This question forces teachers to think beyond short-term recall and focus on what learning they want to last. This is where we stop writing goals that sound impressive but don't actually tell us anything. Enduring understandings and those essential questions is what helps move instruction away from coverage and toward true meaning. Wiggins gives the example of the Constitution, saying students will understand the Constitution. This sounds great, but it's not a real goal. A better goal explains what students can do with that understanding. Once the goal is clear, stage 2 asks how students will prove they met it. This is where UBD reminds us that just nodding along during a lesson does not count as evidence. This shift is especially important because traditional assessments don't always show whether students can actually apply what they've learned. In my science class, I'm currently teaching a unit on weather and climate. The evidence might include a performance task where students create a weather advisory, along with smaller checks like exit tickets and discussions. Wiggins explains this using a soccer analogy. He says that coaches don't know players understand strategy because they listened. They know because players use it during the game. This analogy highlights that understanding is demonstrated through performance, not passive participation. Only after goals and evidence are clear do we plan lessons. Stage 3 is often where teachers usually start, but UBD intentionally places it last to ensure alignment. This helps avoid activity-based teaching where lessons are fun, but no one is quite sure why. When lessons are aligned this way, activities will have a clear purpose connected to learning goals. Now let's talk about Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy helps us describe how deeply students are thinking, not just what they're learning. Bloom's helps teachers think intentionally about the level of thinking they are asking their students to do. These levels move from basic recall to more complex thinking, and understanding them helps teachers design learning that goes beyond just memorization. Remember and understand are important, but stopping here is how we end up with those students who can pass a quiz and then forget everything a week later. These levels are foundational, but they're not the end goal. For example, at the remember level, a student might identify common weather tools like thermometers or rain gauges. At the understand level, they might explain what information a weather graph is showing in their own words. Apply and analyze push students to actually use what they know and make sense of it. These middle levels are where students begin to transfer learning. At the apply level, students could use weather data to decide what clothing would be appropriate for recess. At the analyze level, they might compare two different weather graphs and determine which one is more effective or has stronger data. Evaluate and create are the highest levels in the revised taxonomy and where learning actually becomes transferable. Creation represents the highest level of cognitive engagement. At the evaluate level, students justify a decision using weather data as evidence. At the create level, they design a weather advisory for a school event using data to support their recommendation. For my final project, I'll apply both frameworks to a third grade science unit focused on weather data and decision making. These objectives that you see on the slide move intentionally through Bloom's taxonomy, from basic knowledge, starting with identify, to higher order thinking down to create. Each objective that I have listed here intentionally builds towards students using data to making informed decisions. Together, UBD and Bloom make it much harder to just accidentally design a lesson that looks busy but doesn't lead to anywhere. Together, these frameworks support intentional planning and meaningful learning. Ultimately, both understanding by design and Bloom's taxonomy help shift instruction from asking, "What am I teaching?" to asking, "What do I want students to be able to do?" When these frameworks are used together, learning becomes more intentional, aligned, and transferable beyond the classroom. The ideas in this presentation are grounded in the work of Wiggins and McTighe's Understanding by Design framework. Also, Bloom's original and revised taxonomies were included, and then supporting instructional design resources that were used in this course. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I look forward to your feedback.